Counter-Strike super teams are notorious for spending millions and choking when it matters most, and these 9 super teams are possibly the worst offenders in CS history. G2 Esports was the first to find out the hard way. Back in 2017, the 2 top-tier French rosters merged to form a French super team. Envious sent over a trio of MBK, KennyS, and Apex, and G2 retained Shox and Body. And just like that, the Samurai fielded the most skilled French Counter-Strike roster ever assembled. What made this especially significant was that it paired Shox and KennyS together for the very first time, a partnership that, despite years of French shuffles, had somehow never been explored. Let's be clear about how talented this lineup actually was. KennyS was the most exciting opper in the scene, the 13th best player in the world in 2016. His flicks were so fast, Valve literally had to nerf the op because he was so good. Shox was the star player in IGL, the clear-cut best French player who could take over a game through sheer skill, and he was coming off a fantastic season being ranked number 6 in the world. MBK was a super versatile anchor and support player who delivered high impact and reliability. Apex was a world-class aggressive entry fragger who opened up rounds that nobody else could. And Body was the promising young rifler who was meant to be the flexible piece that let everyone else do their thing. On paper, this was a slam dunk success, pairing the 2 best French players and surrounding them with the most talented role players. This G2 roster was supposed to be the team to recapture the glory days of French Counter-Strike, but it never came. They did get some big wins like ESL Pro League Season 5 and DreamHack Masters Malmo in 2017, but those results were nowhere near the world beater ambition this roster carried, and most damning were their failures to even win a single playoff game at either major. The internal friction and drama that had plagued the French scene for years reared its ugly head once again. Too many voices, too many egos, and not enough clarity on who the leader actually was. It all came to a head in early 2018. Shox publicly stated he no longer wanted to play with both Apex and MBK, citing a lack of chemistry and inability to be on the same page. The French super team wasn't bad by any means, but they were never really close to restoring the French era. Another nation trying to recapture their glory was Denmark, more specifically the legendary org Astralis. 4 majors, the GOAT era, the team that pioneered modern utility-heavy Counter-Strike and made the rest of the world play catch-up for years. But in 2023, that legacy fell very far away. Astralis were clinging to washed-up legends, Xyp9x and Glaive. The roster was a revolving door of players who had no business at Tier 1. Lucky, Farley, Orup, Buzz, and more. They had missed 2 straight majors and hadn't even been the best team in Denmark for years. The once premier organization wasn't attracting top Danish talent. But in November of 2023, they flipped the script and assembled the best Danish players. They poached Stavn and Yabi from their rivals, the best riflers on Heroic. Device returned home, one of the greatest oppers to ever play the game. BlameF stayed in as IGL, widely regarded as the best fragging in-game leader. And Stare rounded out the roster as the most high upside talent Denmark has ever seen. 4 top 20 players and a promising rookie. Denmark's finest assembled under the most iconic banner in Counter-Strike history. This lineup looked insane, and the timing felt perfect because coming up on the horizon was the 2024 Copenhagen Major, a major on Danish soil. If there was ever a moment to announce that Denmark was back, this was it. The storyline wrote itself. But things ended before they even began, because Astralis failed to qualify for the Copenhagen Major, knocked out in the RMR by 9 Pandas. But the collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. Even before a shot was fired, this project was carrying serious baggage. The Stabby signings had drawn immediate community backlash, and Astralis hadn't even begun competing before their goodwill was already gone. Then came the revelation that they had hired Hunded as their head analyst, a coach with a well-documented history as a convicted cheater who had previously leaked his own team strategies mid-competition. The once untouchable organization was collecting drama like Infinity Stones. Not a great look for a team trying to rebuild its reputation. And inside the server, it was no better. The role overlap between Stavn and BlameF produced an incoherent playstyle that never found its footing. The pressure of expectation, the off-server noise, and structural dysfunction would end up defining this era of Astralis. The once legendary Danish organization became the laughingstock of the community, and went on to miss 5 straight majors in total. And finally, in 2026, they abandoned their Danish roots entirely and went international. Speaking of organizations swinging big, not every super team failure came down to ego or chemistry. Sometimes the world just has other plans. Complexity was an American org that were just acquired by the Dallas Cowboys, the most valuable sports franchise in the world. With NFL money now backing them, owner Jason Lake decided it was time to make a statement. After a humiliating finish at the StarLadder Berlin Major, he took to Twitter and posted one of the most iconic tweets in CS history. "I love our players as individuals, but these results won't be tolerated. If you're a tier 1 player looking for a fresh start, hit me up. I'll pay your buyout and give you the world's highest salaries. Let's build a juggernaut." And he meant every word. Complexity went to Europe and imported Danish stars BlameF and Config. They added Poison, a Bulgarian opper, and brought in major winner Rush, and retained their young prodigy Obo from their previous lineup. The Juggernaut was assembled, and in mid-2020, it looked like Jason's Lake bet was going to pay off. Complexity had just won Blast Premier Spring European Finals, beating Na'Vi, Faze, and Vitality along the way. They were firmly a top 5 team globally and had just made the playoffs of ESL Pro League Season 12, looking to build upon their newfound success. Then, hours before their first playoff match, Obo stepped down from the team. The team was left scrambling as they woke up on match day to find their young star had already left for the airport and was heading home. The 17-year-old star had been in Europe for months, away from his family, grinding through a pandemic with no end in sight. He was just a kid, clearly going through some things mentally and needed to go home. But the timing was devastating. Complexity had just broken into the world's top 5, and another deep playoff run was right in front of them. And that was the beginning of the end. Without Obo, Complexity could never recapture what they had. They searched for stability, tried different pieces, but the project was cooked. The Juggernaut disbanded in 2021 without ever making a major or any other significant result. It's unfortunate how things played out. And speaking of splashing cash with zero return, nobody did it quite like Cloud9. Henry G, former caster freshly installed as Cloud9's GM, was handed complete control of their CS operation and an open checkbook. And he did something nobody in esports had done before. He made the contracts public, every single signing announced with the full salary attached, just like traditional sports. And it felt genuinely exciting, transparent, bold, and a new era. Cloud9 signed Alex from Vitality as their IGL for $1.6 million, Star Opera Woxic from Mouse Sports for $1.3 million, support riflers Mezzi and Floppy for $426,000 and $432,000 respectively, and the biggest scam of all, ESA-Tag for $2.1 million American dollars. Nearly $6 million in contracts, the ambition was real. The Colossus was open for business. But the results were not. They started by coming dead last at Flashpoint 2, failed to qualify for Blast, failed to qualify for Katowice, and the team overall looked terrible. Everyone was underperforming, and so just 4 months into the project, Cloud9 parted ways with their head coach, Kassad. Then their star Opera Woxic on that $1.3 million contract was benched after playing just 24 maps due to his inability to travel from Turkey, making it functionally impossible to operate within the team. A NA player named Zeppa came in as a replacement, but at this point the roster was basically dead. They bombed out a Pro League Season 13, and in March 2021, Cloud9 disbanded the entire project after just 6 months. 9 events, 71 total maps played, and 0 significant victories. And looking back, this roster was nowhere near a super team, but they sure spent like it. The transparency that made the Colossus feel revolutionary on the way in made the failure feel even more humiliating on the way out, because everyone knew exactly how much had been spent on literally nothing. But Cloud9 wasn't done. Their next foray into Counter-Strike looked a lot more credible. By 2023, Cloud9 had rebuilt and assembled a formidable Russian squad, consisting of the Gambit roster and had a powerful core of Axile, Shiro, and Hobbit. At the time, Axile was a superstar rifler, coming off being the number 4 ranked player of 2022. Shiro was a star opper, coming off being the 3rd best player of 2022, and Hobbit was a savvy veteran who provided stability. Then Cloud9 went all in to assemble a CIS super team with the blockbuster signings of Electronic and Perfecto, both pulled directly from Na'Vi, one of the most storied organizations in Counter-Strike history. Electronic was a former multi-time top 5 player in the world, and he would be stepping in as IGL. Perfecto was the former Anchor of the Year and fit perfectly into this lineup. The individual quality was undeniable, and early signs were promising. They made playoffs of Cologne in their debut event, and they won Blast Premier Fall Showdown. This team looked like it was only going to get better. A future top 3 team in the world felt like a realistic expectation. But it never got a chance. Just 3 months in, Shiro, the cornerstone opper, abandoned the project to join Team Spirit, where he would go on to link up with Donk and form one of the most dominant partnerships in CS2. The op was gone, and with it, any realistic chance his roster had of becoming what it was supposed to be. In the aftermath, Cloud9 brought in Boomich to serve as their IGL and part-time opper. But with no dedicated sniper, the roster was nowhere near a title contender. The rest of the squad stuck together for a year, but the results were lacking. It's sad that we never got to see what this 5-man lineup was truly capable of, and you will always wonder what could have been. Though, as we're about to find out, Electronic walking away from one failed super team was just the beginning. After the Cloud9 project collapsed, Electronic was handed another chance, and Virtus Pro paid a 7-figure transfer fee for the privilege of giving it to him. I might be bending the super team definition a bit, but VP was going all in on this move. Virtus Pro had a major winning core that needed a firepower upgrade. James was the sniping genius who developed VP's entire identity and structured system. Flit, Fame, and Norbert were solid rifling talents that followed orders, and Mir was their weakest link, a rifler who wasn't at the level the rest of the roster demanded. So the idea was simple: replace Mir with Electronic, a multi-time top 5 player, to give James strong enough pieces to actually work with, and finally unlock what this roster was capable of at Tier 1. A rifling trio of Flit, Fame, and Electronic operating within James' system was a legitimate plan. It just required Electronic to buy into it, which he never did. Rather than integrating into the system he had joined, Electronic began pulling it apart from the inside. As a former IGL and accomplished veteran himself, he had his own way of thinking. He pushed back on the structure and created an environment where James, the architect of everything VP had built, felt undermined in the server. Loss after loss, the tension began to build. One of the most respected and self-assured strategic minds in Counter-Strike history began visibly doubting himself. His system, his reads, his leadership, a player who had always known exactly how he wanted to play the game, was being made to question all of it. Electronic didn't just fail to fit in, he was corrosive and made it impossible for the James system to work, and eventually the team lost their identity. James was eventually pushed out of his own team entirely. The James era at VP was over. 2 rosters, 2 implosions, 1 team killer. Moving on from a single player destroying a team from the inside, sometimes the problem isn't just one bad actor. Liquid had been through a rough spell, tumbling down the rankings. The organization had lost their fanbase after switching to a European core and were running with Yakindar as IGL. Something had to change, so in 2024, Liquid made some sweeping changes. They came back to a majority America's core. They reunited with Twists, the most decorated NA player, returning to the organization where it all started. Cadian came in as IGL. The Dane who had famously been stabbed in the back was given the opportunity to lead again in CS2. Liquid retained Yakindar and Naf, and to round out the roster was Skulls, a Brazilian aimer that was averaging a 1.16 rating on Pain Gaming. And to oversee it all, they brought in Brazilian legend Zeus as head coach. A blend of star power, proven leadership, young talent, and experienced hands. Everything you'd want from a Tier 1 roster. But the international mix that looked logical on paper produced a team that never found any chemistry together. The team emphasized team bonding activities, boot camps, and building a culture. And yet none of it translated into any kind of cohesion where it actually mattered, because the personalities in the roster were simply incompatible. As Coach Zeus put it,
I'm starting getting fed up because I see that we're not saying what's the reason. It's like, oh, I don't like your calling. And the reason when I know is like, because Russ has told me that he doesn't like how Casper is as a human, that he does some shit. I'm like, you dislike the guy on a personal level and you can't even tell him that. So how the fuck are we gonna do this shit? Right? One bad apple will contaminate the rest, and it's like, it's really hard to go the other way around. And
Cadian was an energetic presence, the kind of IGL that could galvanize a locker room. But that only works when people you're leading actually like you. The personal chemistry between Cadian, Twists, and Yakindar simply was never there, which made his job almost impossible, because Cadian's rotate-heavy system demanded players to commit to his reads without hesitation. And Twist and Yukindar, two players with their own understanding of how the game should be played, were never going to subordinate themselves to that. They didn't believe in the system, and obviously when you don't believe in the in-game leader, the whole thing falls apart in real time. And to make matters worse, the team just wasn't fragging. Cadian's individual performances as an AWPer had sharply declined in CS2, Skulls was not good, and Yukindar was basically first to die every round. The results reflected every bit of that dysfunction. Liquid disappointed at every big event, and the nail in the coffin was when they failed to qualify for the Copenhagen Major. An embarrassing outcome for this super team. Another expensive international roster that looked great on paper and achieved absolutely nothing. And how can we forget the original international super team that started this trend? Faze Clan in late 2017 had assembled the most stacked roster we've ever seen. Nico, a superstar rifler from Mouse and the #2 player of 2017. Guardian, Navi's elite AWPer and former world #2. Olfmeister, Fnatic legend and former #1 player in 2015. Rain, a consistent elite rifler and a 4th ranked player of 2017. And Kerrigan as IGL, widely regarded as one of the best in-game leaders. This was the definition of a super team. Success seemed almost guaranteed. And the results were immediate. At ESO1 New York 2017, FaZe were dominant. They didn't drop a single map throughout the entire tournament, and Nico dropped a staggering 1.7 rating. Then they followed it up at E-League Premier 2017. Again, not a single map dropped, with Rain winning tournament MVP. The most talented roster ever assembled was living up to every bit of the hype. Then came the E-League Boston Major Grand Final in 2018. FaZe were heavy favorites. They stormed through the bracket, Nico posting a 1.5 rating in the playoffs, looking unstoppable. Their opponents in the Grand Final? Cloud9, 5 Americans who were massive underdogs, a roster that only had one player who barely even cracked the top 20. The score was 15-14, and Kerrigan had masterfully pulled the rotation, leaving Stewie2K alone on the B site. Just trade him and Nico will finally get his major. But we all know what happened.
Stewie's on his own, but look at the time! Look at the time, there's 7 seconds to plant the bomb! They're trying to build pyramids, but there's no more play! Stewie's won the round, we're going to overtime!
Cloud9 have done it! How have they done that? They came back all the way! All the way!
Cloud9 completed one of the most stunning comebacks in Counter-Strike history and walked away with the trophy. This was the most talented roster we've ever seen. But when the lights were at their absolute brightest, a match point, grand final of the major, they couldn't deliver. You can win every S-tier event on the calendar, but in Counter-Strike, if you don't win a major, there will always be an asterisk next to your name. And for this FaZe lineup, the asterisk will never go away. And finally, the most modern example of a super team is everyone's favorite, Team Falcons. Saudi oil money, the deepest pockets in esports, and one simple mission: buy the best team in the world. Their first rosters were never the real plan. The French team, Enscore, Boros, all placeholders. The plan was always Nico, but in 2023, he sensationally rebuffed them in a last-minute U-turn, leaving Falcons treading water, missing 2 straight majors, going nowhere fast. But then in 2025, they made a breakthrough. They finally signed Nico, the marquee signing they had been chasing since 2023. Then in April, the entire heroic core of Dexter, Kixan, and Tessus followed. And it actually worked. Falcons won PGL Bucharest 2025, Dexter taking home MVP and lifting their first ever S-tier trophy. The celebration had barely finished before Falcons replaced him with Monacy, a 19-year-old generational talent and one of the most gifted players of his era. They would go on to make final after final but could never get over the hump. So in June, Falcons replaced their weakest link and signed another 17-year-old Russian prodigy, Kyosuke, the hottest prospect since Donk. The hype around this kid was crazy. People were saying he was going to be a generational talent. Surely having 3 generational talents is enough, but so far it hasn't worked at all. Their biggest talent is finding ways to lose these rounds. In 2026, with their full superstar lineup intact, Falcons have failed to make it past the quarterfinals. So much firepower, and somehow they're regressing with every tournament that passes. It's looking like Falcons need a roster move, so don't be surprised when they buy Donk and still find a way to lose. Every team on this list had the pieces, but none of them could put it all together when it mattered most. Which one is the biggest disappointment? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.